Are you excited to get up in the morning and tear into another day? Or do you dread everything about it? If you've ever wondered, is that all there is? Doing what works is your answer. Even if you feel good about where you're headed, we can help make things easier and a whole lot more fun. We're your guide to a better life. Now, here's your host for Doing What Works, Maureen Anderson.
Once upon a time, I worked for someone I was afraid of. I shouldn't have been afraid of the guy. I was a grown-up by then, but he scared me. Daryl Anderson, my husband and producer, I won't mention his name, but you know who I'm talking about, I bet.
I think I do, and I hope it's not me, though.
Oh, I don't consider myself working for you.
You don't, of course. Probably the other way around more than anything.
That was a good try. Well, I'll never forget waiting with this gentleman outside a room we were both needing to get into when he just kind of snapped and said, "Fine, I'll say it first. Good morning." I was so stunned by that, I blurted out the truth the way you do when you're stunned. And I said, "I'm afraid of you." And, of course, from that point on, every day, I'd say good morning so sweetly and so over the top. I know he ruined the day he ever brought it up. But the reason I bring it up is that my guest on Doing What Works today says you may not believe how much the simple act of saying good morning to your employees matters. Steve Cadigan is former vice president of talent at LinkedIn, who took that company from 400 to 4,000 employees while competing against the likes of Google and Facebook and Twitter. It is such a privilege to have you with us, Steve.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
I can't wait to hear more about LinkedIn and Cadigan Talent Ventures. But first, is this really a thing that you have to train managers to say good morning to people?
I think it's more a case of people just sometimes forget some of the very simple actions that can have a really big impact on setting a tone with how they relate with people that they work with. And one of the things that I've found through the many organizations I've worked with in my career is that people just tend to skip the simple courtesy that sets the tone for the day. And if it's done repeatedly, it becomes a real irritant in the relationship.
Yes, and it strikes me that it's free. I mean, it's free to say good morning. It costs nothing. But the resentment that builds up is unbelievable if you don't.
That's so true. That's so true. I mean, I can't tell you how many times, hundreds of times. It's sad, but it's true. Hundreds of times I've had employees approach me trying to get some help addressing a conflict that they've got with their boss. And inevitably, as we go through the whole discussion, most of the time it ends with, "And they don't even say good morning to me." Which is such a simple miss. It's so, like you said, it is such an easy thing to do, and it kind of just puts everything out there. And, on a very simple level, I think it's something that we all should remember, but at the same time, that simple act can set the tone for feeling from your manager, do you respect me? Do you acknowledge me? Am I important to you? And I think we all want to feel that we make a difference, that we're valued, and that our contributions matter. And sometimes if we just overlook those simple things, especially when there's a little bit of tension in the air, there's a tough project deadline, or you're having to put in lots of extra hours at the office, sometimes people just want to dive in and forget the simple act of, "Hey, how's it going? I hope you had a good day yesterday. Let's get started."
I'm going to spoil the surprise, but you're going to get a handwritten thank you note after this interview, and I'm mentioning it only because I have sent these out since I started doing the talk show, and you wouldn't believe how many people have told me they have not gotten a handwritten letter, in one case, for 30 years.
Oh, my goodness.
And
oh, my goodness.
It tells me that if you're trying to get ahead in the game of life, start with basic courtesy. You're going to eliminate, unfortunately, most people right there.
Right. I think all of us, well, what's sad is most of us have reverted to handwriting the holiday greeting cards. That's about the only time we actually put pen to paper.
Yes. Also, I just read somewhere that dating is not as much fun these days. And they showed all these pictures of everybody at a table at a nice restaurant and both people are looking at their phones.
I know. We're living in a super hyper distracted environment, and I think what we all face in our personal lives and our professional lives is this battle for attention and battle for focus. And because there's so many things you could do. You can binge watch Breaking Bad or House of Cards or
Big Bang Theory.
Or you could be looking at the stock ticker on your phone. Or for me, my dirty habit is looking at sports scores all the time because I'm a big sports junkie. But it's so true. We've got so many reasons why to not be in the moment and to not be connecting with the people that we're around in our lives.
And it's a culture of being paid attention to that will help you attract the best people. How did LinkedIn recruit you?
When you start getting to the point in your life when you have kids, your entire social network is the people who are attending the birthday parties or the soccer matches or the basketball games you go to. And sure enough, this is a true story. I was going to a kids' amusement park with a bunch of other families who we were all in the same child care center together. And during the course of that, the kids are running from ride to ride, and you're talking to the parents. I met a gentleman who was interviewing at LinkedIn, and I was working at a video game company at the time, and I said, hey, listen, I help my friends negotiate jobs all the time. If you ever need help negotiating your package, I would love to help you. And, as an insider, as a human resource executive for 25 years, I've got lots of tips and tricks that I can help lend to support your efforts of negotiation. And so we struck up a friendship. A few weeks later, he said, hey, guess what, Steve? We're looking for a head of human resources. We've been looking for about 9 months. We haven't found anyone. Would you be interested? And I said, no. My wife and I were working in the same company. Our 3 boys were all in the on-site child care there. My life was a minivan to work, a wonderful job in a really cool industry. I said, no, I'm fine. He says, no, Steve, you really should do this. And I said, well, okay, I'll go check it out. And so I reluctantly walked into the offices in Mountain View, California, and they were about 6 years old at the time, around 400 people. And I'd use LinkedIn as a human resources person. I think you were pretty familiar with tools like that offer you access to talent or that help. I was using another tool called Plaxo at the time to sort of keep my contacts together. And I said, yeah, I'm somewhat familiar with it. It looks interesting. And so I walked in there, and for me, it was love at first sight. I met the entire executive team in 2 days, and you know what, Maureen? I couldn't sleep for 2 weeks. I was so excited. And that never had happened to me in my entire professional career, where you find a situation where you say, I've got what they want, they've got what I want, and this is a perfect match. So I stayed up. I'm not kidding you. I didn't sleep for 2 weeks. I read everything I could about the industry, and I got super excited. And as it turns out, they wound up offering me the job. And I didn't realize it at the time. I was like, well, let me think about it. Maybe it's not the right, thing for me. But in retrospect, that turned out to be one of the most amazing career adventures of my lifetime.
They weren't a household name at that point, though, unless you were in HR. Right.
That's so true. The brand recognition was extremely low. They didn't have the sex appeal at that. And even today, I would argue they don't have the necessary sex appeal of a Facebook or a Twitter or a Pinterest, where there's this little extra, fun element that goes with it. This is professional networking, and it didn't have the aura, if you will. And that, you bring up with that question a really good first challenge that I faced stepping into an organization. I was the first human resources person really that they had hired. They'd had a few recruiters helping them who were amazing, but I was the first person with any what I call HR chops to go in there. And, imagine you're a 6-year-old company. You've got about 400 people. You've been through a few evolutions, and you've developed a little bit of muscle memory. And I walked in there, and the very first day, one of the employees came to my office and said, one of my grandparents has died. I need to take some time off. What's our bereavement policy? And I had one of those moments where I kind of looked left, looked right, didn't see a binder with any policies because there hadn't been any developed. And I just sort of said, well, it's a relative in my head, probably 3 days. I said, how about 3 days? And she said, yeah, that's fine. And so I said, policy number 1 has just been created. That was the beginning of, some of the real grassroots having to start from scratch. But this whole lack of a brand was the biggest challenge we had in recruiting talent in the very early days of LinkedIn.
You said you couldn't sleep for 2 weeks. What was it about the office or the vibe that was so intoxicating? For
me, it was not. It was less the culture that I saw or the people, because when you're interviewing, and this was, when you're interviewing for an executive position in the Valley, it's very tricky because it's a small valley, and I wanted to come in like a back door because I didn't want my current company to know that I was out looking, and there were alumni from my company that were working at LinkedIn. I knew it, and I wanted to be super careful, so I didn't have a lot of time to sort of check things out. But what really appealed to me was how I thought LinkedIn could change the world, especially how they could change the world for college graduates. So, and I was just looking in the keyhole, and even though I could just see a little bit about what their plans were, and they shared with me some of what their vision was. But what really resonated the most with me was some of the problems that I'd had when I finished college and how different the world was going to be with LinkedIn. For example, when I was finishing up my undergrad, it was probably the latter half of my senior year, I finally realized, hey, I probably should go to the Career Center. I go to the Career Center, I open a 3-ring binder. This is sort of like the mid-'80s, if you will. There was a list of companies that were coming on campus to interview, and the career counselor said, so, Steve, what are you interested in doing? I said, well, I'm a history major. I don't know. What could a history major do? They said, well, you can teach or you can become a historian.
I'm going to break in here, Steve, and let you finish the story when we come back from the commercial break. This is Doing What Works.
Maureen Anderson's latest book, The Career Clinic, 8 Simple Rules for Finding Work You Love, is a collection of stories from 50 people, offering advice and inspiration for those looking for a more fulfilling career. One of the 8 simple rules involves looking within yourself to see just where you are and what you feel compelled to do. One of the 50 advice dispensers is Michael Bryant of CTS Consulting in Baltimore.
There are millions of people that get up every day, and as they're in the car in the morning, this is a conversation they're having. I am getting ready to do something that I may not particularly want to do around people that if I didn't have to work with them, I'd have absolutely nothing to do with them for money that may not be all that well, that may or may not fit into the larger things I want to do with my life, and I'm fighting traffic to get there. When you ask them, how did you get into this dilemma, they say, oh, I competed for the opportunity to do this.
Chris Shea of San Diego was a single mom and reluctant to pursue her dream of writing greeting cards when a friend talked her into it.
He said, well, why don't you start the company today? And I said, that wouldn't be possible. And he said, why not? And I said, because my youngest son is, I think he was 12. And so he said, what's your excuse going to be when your youngest son is 20? I had written a column for a little local newspaper, and I knew I had writing skills. I knew I had art skills, which although they weren't phenomenal art skills, they were enough to escort the words off the page and into somebody's brain.
Chris's story of starting her own greeting card company, Life Size Cards, is found in Maureen Anderson's book, The Career Clinic, 8 Simple Rules for Finding Work You Love. Published by the American Management Association, it's available now from booksellers everywhere.
What Color is Your Parachute author Dick Bowles was recently quoted as saying that the job hunting process in this country is still somewhat Neanderthal, but companies like LinkedIn are changing that, and we have the privilege of talking with Steve Cadigan on Doing What Works today. He's the former vice president of talent at LinkedIn. Now he has his own company. I interrupted him mid-story, but Steve, I think the story you were telling is so important because Here is how career planning still works for an awful lot of college kids. And that is toward the end of their junior year, or maybe the start of their senior year, they realize they'll want a job when they get out of school. They wander into the campus career center. A counselor says, "What would you like to do?" And they say something like, "I'm a history major. What do you have?"
Exactly. And so picking up this story, what got me so excited about LinkedIn was, here's a career counselor who probably hadn't had a very successful career on their own, giving me advice around something that was pretty impactful to what was in front of me, which is my career. And so they offered me the path of being a historian or being a teacher, neither of which necessarily appealed to me. All I knew was that I wanted to get into business, but I had no role models in my family. So what excited me about LinkedIn is what's available to students today, and what's been available probably for the last 4 or 5 years, is an experience that could go like this. You go to your career center and you say, "Hey, I'm a history major." And the career person will say, "Well, great. What do you want to do?" And you say, "I don't really know." And they'll say, "Well, let's look at everyone who ever graduated from this university who was a history major. Let's look what they did with that career. Oh, look over here. Some of them became philanthropists. Some of them became investment bankers. Some of them became human resource executives. Some of them became lawyers. Some of them became politicians. And now you've got clusters of opportunities that maybe you had never even contemplated before." And that's what got me really excited, that there's going to be this unveiling, if you will, of opportunity for people to see a path that they may have never contemplated or never might have even realized in their lives before. And that, I think, is what should get everyone excited about what's in front of us today. And that the kind of data that LinkedIn can reveal can answer things like, well, what major can best prepare me to be a CEO? And we looked at that data at LinkedIn and we said, you know what? No major can prepare you better than another major. It's the experience of growth and learning and being in dynamic organizations where you can learn and try new things. And that's really compelling, I think, and what got me to be so excited about being part of something that was going to make such a difference, I thought, in the world.
Before you found out about the opportunity at LinkedIn, it doesn't sound like you were that enamored with the company. I mean, you knew of it, you used it, but it wasn't quite the religious experience not being part of it yourself.
You've captured it exactly. I was a casual user. Once in a while, I would be connecting with someone. I had no idea how I was going to incorporate that into my world. It was a very sort of a casual relationship that I had.
So once you realized what you could do, the decision to join them was a butt of course.
It was. However, this was a new opportunity for me, and it was scary on one level. I had been what I call a big company guy, and I had worked for only public organizations, the smallest of which was about 1,300 people, and that was when I was up in Vancouver, British Columbia. It was a U.S. company, but their main operations were just north of the border. And I was going to a private, startup, pre-IPO, and what appealed to me was the fact that I was going to get a chance to apply all these learnings and lessons from my whole career. And sadly, most of those were how not to build an organization or how not to run an organization. And I wanted a chance to do it my way, to come in with something with soft clay. But I was also scared, Maureen, because I'd never built something from nothing before. And I didn't know what I didn't know, and I knew that there was going to be a lot of learnings for me along the way.
That's everybody's task in life, though, isn't it? Unless they're willing to work for somebody else forever.
Right. And, you know, for me, I feel very fortunate to have stumbled onto Silicon Valley, which is an unbelievable nest of opportunity and growth of new ideas and new companies. But prior to being in the Valley, I was working for an insurance company north of San Francisco in a wonderful company, Fireman's Fund Insurance Company. And what was great about that experience was that these were salt-of-the-earth people making a difference, providing value, and they were great people. But those people were there for the rest of their lives. And I was in my late 20s going, there's got to be something more. And so I ventured out through the first time a headhunter ever called me, and they said, hey, we've got this job in Silicon Valley, and I was like, oh, wow, yeah, the Valley. I want to go try the Valley. But I had no idea what I was getting myself into.
Steve Cadigan's story will continue in just a moment on Doing What Works.
Anyone who's looking to have a more fulfilling career will find lots of useful advice and inspiration in Maureen Anderson's latest book, The Career Clinic, 8 Simple Rules for Finding Work You Love. Here you'll read stories about people like Janice Lasko. She and her husband quit their jobs to live in an RV, finding work opportunities as they travel.
When we first decided to do this full-time, we told our friends before we did sell everything, we said this is what we were going to do. Our friends had never heard of anything like this, and they separated us. And the girls took me into one room, and the guys stayed with my husband and said, normal people don't abandon family and friends.
Lasko even became an editor for a magazine for RV enthusiasts. Read the rest of her story and 49 others in The Career Clinic, 8 Simple Rules for Finding Work You Love by Maureen Anderson. Available now from booksellers everywhere.
A landlord who used to give me nothing but grief did offer me one nugget of wisdom that has been sort of a guidepost for me. And that is, you will look back on your life and regard the times that you were most afraid, least sure that things were going to be okay, as being the most fun. And he has been right. And I think the reason is it just makes for a better story. If you went to see a movie where everything was mapped out and the hero of the story never had a challenge that he didn't know he was going to escape with his life from, you'd be bored out of your mind. Why is it so difficult to remember that when it comes to your own life? With us is Steve Cadigan on Doing What Works today. He's the former vice president of talent at LinkedIn. And Steve, you took a risk by joining that company.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I think, to extend the advice that you got from your landlord, which I thought was going to be buy low, sell high. To extend the advice, there's two ways I absorb when I'm afraid, and I've been afraid many times in my career. One is I feel very alive, and it's very energizing. And then I also feel like if I'm nervous about something, I don't have enough information. So I need to go get more information and with which to make a decision. And, faced with that choice of going to LinkedIn, I said, okay, well, look at all the things I could learn. If this company doesn't survive, and it's the first time I'd ever contemplated going to a company with the prospect that this company might not make it and it might just crash. And that happens to most startups in the Valley. They don't make it. I said, well, what's the upside for me? And the upside in this case was I was going to learn. I was going to have a much bigger network of people, access to investors and VCs and a bunch of other people. And I thought the organization was filled with some really interesting people that could teach me a lot of things. And maybe failure was going to be a good lesson for me in an organization. So that's why I sort of, held my nose, closed my eyes, and jumped off the cliff, if you will.
That's a point I think worth lingering on. I've heard the suggestion that when you find yourself worrying if you're going to fail, finish the conversation. What if you do fail? What's going to happen? Are you going to recover, or are you going to be, living under a bridge with your possessions in a grocery cart? Probably not. I mean, you have to talk yourself down off that ledge constantly, but people stop at the what if I fail, and they just freak out their whole lives and eventually curl up and have that boring life. And I think it's such a shame.
Yeah, and I think that leads to, one of the most important things, that if you really want to have a rich career adventure, and I truly feel that people have access to more information to make better decisions around where they're working and who they're working with and the kind of culture that they want to be a part of. But what you're getting at is the fact that we all need to have a network of mentors and people that challenge us. And I met a woman recently who calls it the personal boardroom. You need to have a personal boardroom of people that aren't just like you, that do the same kind of work that you do, that are in all kinds of different places in their lives and in your world. And you need to go to those folks and say, hey, here's what I'm thinking. What do you think? And here's what I'm worried about. What do you think? And it does take a little bit of stepping up in your comfort zone to admit that you're nervous or you're scared but that, I think, is a real strength, and I think your friends and your network will really be excited to help you. And, I feel fortunate that I not only have a decent network here, that it's always changing and growing, but I also try to offer that to people in a sort of pay-it-forward kind of way.
I would be remiss if I didn't ask you how, with LinkedIn not being the brand it is today and without having the money that your competitors did to attract talent, how did you do it? How did you grow that company into what it is?
Wow, that is part of a book that I'm actually starting to write right now. I think the short answer to that question, Maureen, is culture. I couldn't pay what those big companies you mentioned initially that we were competing against for talent, Apple, Facebook, Groupon, Zynga, and Google was across the street. I couldn't pay them the same kind of salaries. I couldn't offer the same kind of benefits. But we finally got really laser clear on who we were as an organization, and we said we want to be the place where someone has the experience of their lifetime, that they will grow, learn, develop, and impact in this company more than they could anywhere else. And so we couldn't promise to pay you more. We couldn't promise all these fancy benefits of, if you have a baby, you get a stroller, which is what, Google offers a lot of their people on mat leave. But that started to really resonate with people, that we started to have a real mission in life, which is come here and you'll find your dream job. And oh, by the way, we're helping everyone else find their dream jobs. That's what we're about at LinkedIn. Does that get you excited? And if it does, come join us. And having that, drawing back to something that we could control, which is our culture and our mission and purpose, that had a huge impact at changing the tide. Now, it wasn't as simple as that. There's a lot that went into that. But once we got clear on that mission and that purpose and the culture, things really started coming together and people started to join us at a faster clip.
Because people want to be part of something special.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I think, and this is it, especially the generation that's graduating right now, is they're looking for an adventure to make a difference in the world. And I think we have much more visibility to what matters or how companies treat their employees or how they treat the environment or the communities where they do business. And I think people want to go somewhere where good is being done. Absolutely. And that also gets to the new reality for companies, which is they have got to be really clear on their brand to be able to attract great people.
Businessman Harvey Mackay has a guideline for hiring, which goes something like, ask yourself how you would feel if this person was working for the competition. And that's your answer. Do you have something simple like that you can offer us in terms of hiring advice, Steve?
So one of the interesting questions I get all the time is, what is the best interview question or ways to guide that? And I honestly think interviews are a really bad indicator of future job performance and future relationship performance. So I think reference checking is much better than interviewing, and spending time getting to know someone over a period of weeks and days is a much better way.
Steve Cadigan, my guest on Doing What Works today. His company is Cadigan Talent Ventures, which you can learn all about at, you guessed it, CadiganTalentVentures.com. When we come back, management lessons from Dr. Seuss. Stay tuned for more of Doing What Works.
Free life advice, whether you're 17 or 70. It's all right here every week on Doing What Works and online at MaureenAnderson.com.
No regrets. That's one of the 8 simple rules for finding work you love in Maureen Anderson's book, The Career Clinic. How does having no regrets factor into the search for your dream job? It's about doing the kind of work and living the kind of life that has meaning. One of the 50 people Maureen features in the book is Greg Lavoie, author of another book titled Callings.
A calling to me is really just any urging or prompting or even imperative that comes from the deep life, from deep inside your life, that tells you what it's going to take to remain in integrity with yourself, that's going to keep you aligned with your sense of passion and your sense of purpose.
The time to give thought to what your calling might be, says Lavoie, is right now.
Given the fact, the brute existential fact that you're going to die and be a million years dead, what do you want to do with this little nick of time? What do you really want to do? You really want to be going to this job and pushing paper around or dealing with people when you'd rather be self-employed or whatever it happens to be about the job you hate? I wouldn't say that without also saying in the same breath that there are sacrifices. And sometimes there are a lot bigger sacrifices than people anticipate. It doesn't mean the calling's wrong. It just means it's the way things turn out. It's the way life goes. But I just think that thing about consulting your death is really critical. To really contemplate the fact that you are going to die. And what kind of life do you really want to have? I mean, it's up to you. What do you want to do with it?
Another person featured in the Career Clinic, 8 Simple Rules for Finding Work You Love, is Valerie Young.
I was working in a Fortune 500 company. I was commuting 90 miles a day to my job, going to my cubicle. It was a very big and nice cubicle. I was a manager in a marketing department and not particularly satisfied, but I made very good money. And I think, as is the case for a lot of people, I had a painful wake-up call. My mom passed away when she was 61. She was 5 months away from retiring. And it was just one of those, what am I doing with my life moments? And within 3 months, I had left my job.
Young then started on the path to her present career, helping people get creative with their lives at changingcourse.com. Some people, like Jay Gubrud, discovered what they were meant to do almost by accident. Gubrud worked in sales and found his calling at a sales seminar.
I looked around the audience to see how people were reacting to the speaker, and they were all just getting into it. They're on the edge of their seats. And it occurred to me that this is exactly what I want to do.
And so he became a public speaker. Gubrud's story is also in the Career Clinic, 8 Simple Rules for Finding Work You Love, written by Maureen Anderson, host of Doing What Works. The book is published by the American Management Association and is available from your favorite bookseller.
Steve Cadigan from Cadigan Talent Ventures, my guest on Doing What Works today. I'm your host, Maureen Anderson, and if you were following Steve on Twitter, that's S. Cadigan, by the way, you would have been treated to this question recently. Could it be that Dr. Seuss's Green Eggs and Ham was the first book on change management? Steve?
Well, I think as every parent must have gone through what I've gone through in life, which is you're up late reading books to your kids. And in one time it was a Shel Silverstein book, and then it was a Dr. Seuss book, and I said, wait a second, this is all management theory right here. Being comfortable doing something that is uncomfortable, or trying to get someone to do something that they don't want to do. It seems to be very, very common, and I was just taken aback by how often I see that in children's books.
Yes, and the lesson I got from Green Eggs and Ham eventually was the importance of free samples. And when we're talking about hiring and recruiting, it's often suggested that job hunters do internships. Are you a big fan of that from the employer side as far as getting to know someone? There's no better way, is there?
There is no better way. It's an absolutely great opportunity for both parties. It's a 2-month interview process for the candidate to check out the company and the culture. I mean, you can't really know everything to make a good job decision in a 1-hour, 2-hour meeting. It's impossible. And this is why we moved in a very big way to do on-campus recruiting at LinkedIn, bigger than any company I've ever worked for, to really get very aggressive on campus and get some great talent in. But it's a great opportunity, as you mentioned, Maureen, for the candidate to learn about the flow and does this environment make my heart sing, and for the company to see, hey, is this person, do they fit with our culture, what we're about, and are they going to make a big contribution here? Well,
you said interviewing isn't the best way to get to know somebody. Of course it isn't, because it's just a few minutes. I've been an intern, and I've thought, geez, there's so much work. Interns are a lot of work, but anything done right in life is a lot of work. And I don't know that many companies who would say, this guy was an intern for 3 months, and boy, he really changed when he started working here full time. I mean, you get to know somebody.
Absolutely, absolutely. And a lot of that learning is not necessarily in the confines of your office. It's after hours and getting to really form a connection. I mean, I think people do their best work when they're feeling at their most comfortable, and they feel right and feel safe and feel like this is the place that works for them. And that just takes some time. And it's, when I was doing M&A work at Cisco for 4 years, and we did 50 acquisitions all over the world, and one time we had 11 going on at the same time, we used to be very clear on my integration team that the best work we're doing is never in the office. It's in the break room, it's at dinners, it's at breakfast, it's out of the office when people are going to feel comfortable to ask you those questions. And, when you're a student and you're going in for an internship, I mean, there's a lot of intimidation and a lot of awkwardness, but if you've got someone that you can meet and connect with and ask those questions, you're going to be able to sort out whether this is the right place for you much faster and much better.
Why'd you leave LinkedIn?
For me, if you look at my background, I think Thomas Jefferson is the person that once said, every 3 or 4 years we need a radical change in our lives. And that's definitely been the case for my career. I think the longest I've ever been with one company was 6 years, and that was because I did a big shift after 4 and went to Asia when I was with Cisco. But for me, I was excited to do something different. Working in a company that was 400 was very different than the company that was 4,000, and I missed getting my hands in. I missed doing things myself, and I was enjoying helping some of the original founders of LinkedIn go start their own enterprises and do something different. And I said, you know what? At LinkedIn, we're preaching, go find your dream job, and you know what? I think I'm ready for something different.
You hit on something that always used to bug me when I hosted a show called The Career Clinic, the precursor to Doing What Works. I was stunned by how few career consultants really, truly loved what they did. And it reminds me of something you said earlier in the program about taking advice from somebody in the campus career center. It's so unfair to these people because I know some of them, it's their calling. But for many others, you don't want to take their advice because, come on, is this the pinnacle of your career?
Absolutely. And I hope I didn't offend any career counselor who's calling into this program, because there are people who are amazing and doing magic with that. But this is part of the challenge, and we were building out our college program at LinkedIn because we wanted more college students and graduates to be on the network and to use the network. And we would go to universities and find the career centers are one of the most underfunded parts of the university, which really surprised us. Because isn't the responsibility of the university to graduate people into productive parts of the world, into society, into business, or nonprofits? And what we did find was, once we started showing how the insights of the LinkedIn platform could really help them, a lot of these career counselors got really excited and were able to negotiate more budgets for themselves. So I think that career counselor ammunition is just growing and growing and growing. And you're going to be insulated with the information you have from even a bad career counselor, because you're going to have a lot more self-service capability going forward than you do today.
This is going to need to be about a 30-second answer, but were you as afraid to start your own company after LinkedIn as you were afraid to join LinkedIn to begin with?
No, not at all. Not at all. I think I'm getting long in the tooth, and I had plenty of opportunities, and I also wanted to take a nice big breath after working for 25 years to coach my kids' soccer a little bit more than I had. So, but no, not at all. It's been a really fun change for me.
I won't go into detail on this, but not everybody realizes just how much trouble some of my guests go to join us on the program. And in the last few minutes of the show with Steve Cadigan, I want to give him an opportunity to look back on his life and the things he's most pleased with, work or otherwise. That's ahead on Doing What Works.
If your car needs a tune-up, you've come to the wrong radio show. If your life needs a tune-up, then stay tuned for more of Doing What Works.
It isn't the things you tried and failed, as the saying goes, that will leave you with regret when your life is winding down. It's the things that you didn't do. And one of the things I am most proud of in this episode of Doing What Works is that we are bringing you evidence of what it is like to not live that way. Steve Cadigan is former vice president of talent at LinkedIn. Now he's got his own company, CadiganTalentVentures.com. I want to slow down a little. I know there's so much I'm trying to get into these last few minutes with you, Steve. But where does that spirit come from? Any idea?
I'm not sure, but it's probably something to do with the fact that my father is an ordained minister, and he moved us around a lot. I grew up in South Africa. I was born in the States, grew up in South Africa, came back to the U.S., and I've always been excited by adventure, and I think that served me well. And I think especially going into Silicon Valley, that the crazier and the more chaotic things were, the more I got excited. And that I don't know where that necessarily comes from. It may have come from our family moving around a bit, but I really like it when things are not boring.
When you look back on your career, are there memorable scenes that stick out that you replay over and over, like one day or one moment?
There are a couple, for sure, for me. The one was the day I decided that I wanted to do human resources for the rest of my life. Now, I'm a big sports buff, and everything I love about sports is what I love about human resources, because I don't think that there is any greater art than the art of coordinating people to try to achieve an outcome together. And I love watching sports to see how people perform in certain situations, and that's the same thing I like in organizations, is I'm trying to field a team and a group and set a tone and put them in the right environment where they're going to do their best work, working with the best people that make their hearts sing. And that is not easy to do, and it takes a lot of time to figure out. But I was going through a really rough time with a company up in Vancouver, British Columbia, and we'd gone through an SEC investigation, and we'd had our CFO resign in the middle of a quarter, and our stock had taken a dive. And I was doing everything I could to try to keep the focus of the team on to we've got bigger things and so forth. And our CEO, Bob Bailey, came to me at the end of the year and said, Steve, I don't know that I could have made it through this year without you.
Oh.
And I would have worked for free. I don't tell him this. I would have worked for free for that man for the rest of my life. He said, I don't think I could have made it without you. And I get chills now even thinking about that. And that was the ultimate compliment, I think. And it's hard when you're in the human resources world because you can't run out into the hallways and go, I just helped Bob from making a horrible decision, or I just, prevented that person from getting fired who shouldn't have been fired because the facts were all wrong. You can't celebrate out loud. It's a very, very quiet, environment.
I've never thought of it like that, but yeah, they're almost like the tax collection department of a company in terms of the public sentiment, Daryl.
Truly an unsung hero.
Yeah, I didn't want to use the cliche.
I did.
Yeah. But you're really, when people's chips are down, and this is the thing, you talk about how do you know when you build trust with someone? It's the same thing as who's a more loyal customer, the one you never have a problem with or the one you do have a problem and you recover? And in building relationships, trust doesn't start until things get a little bit rough.
Yeah.
And then you see what someone's made of,
Yeah, character doesn't shine through in the easy parts of life.
That's right.
What are you most proud of in your career, Steve?
I think the things that I'm most proud of are the small, numerous times when I helped someone navigate a block that they were experiencing in their career where they thought, I'm not happy, I don't like my boss, and I helped them navigate through to something that made them feel better and made them make a bigger impact. And there are just so many stories. There's one time at Fireman's Fund where a woman was just ready to quit, and I said, no, you are in the wrong job, you're doing the wrong things. Let's just please give me a day or two to talk to someone else. And we connected her with a different manager, and she went on and completely changed her career. And her name's Tracy Wickenhofer, and I was looking her up on LinkedIn the other day to kind of see what she's doing, and she's still gone on to be an amazing database administrator. But it was one of those little moments where that's what I love about HR. You can touch people's lives and really make a difference.
Such a treat to have you with us, Steve. Thank you again.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Steve Cadigan, CadiganTalentVentures.com, and thank you for listening to this edition of Doing What Works.
This broadcast is copyrighted by North Shore Productions. To learn more about the show, you're invited to visit MaureenAnderson.com. You can read Maureen's blog, listen to her podcast, or pass along suggestions for the program. I'm Cindy Weir. Thanks for listening, and tune in again next week for more great advice.